Hey everybody, today's episode contains a list of podcasts geared towards all-around growth. It's a list of the top 10 podcasts I listen to regularly, along with the top 15 podcasts assembled by Dan Miller, author of 48 Days to the Work and Life You Love. So let's get into it, shall we? This is episode number 126 of the All-Around Growth Podcast. This is a show that gives you some insight and tools to build the life and homestead of your dreams. My name is Rob Kaiser and I am your host. Today is Monday, April 5th, 2021. Happy Easter, everyone. We are now into Q2, the second quarter of the typical fiscal year. We are also into the third week of spring. Plants are blooming. Apple, pear, Serviceberry, flowering, Elderberry, Jostaberry, roses, honeysuckle, starting to leaf out. Where's the time going? What are you doing to improve and grow in your life? Well, today's show topic is about podcasts, and specifically a list of 25 podcasts to help you grow and improve your life. It's a list of podcasts that I listen to, and a list of podcasts that a mentor, I consider him a mentor and an author, Dan Miller, creator and author of the work 48 Days to the Work and Life You Love, provide. Both of these lists are in alphabetical order. So I will... How are we going to do this? I've got my list, alphabetical order, just to make it easy. And I will expand on some of them to provide some history and background on what podcasts I listen to, and you may get some insight or clarity as to why I do what I do based on some of the content that I consume myself. That factors into the content I create. And I make no bones about what I talk about. Much of it isn't original. Much of it is regurgitated stuff from this list, which I am about to provide to you. So hopefully this list of podcasts is valuable to you. It's a pretty long and pretty comprehensive list. So let's get right into it. My top podcasts are, in alphabetical order, 48 Days to the Work You Love, Internet Radio Show by Dan Miller. I listen to that a lot. That's one of the podcasts that I stay current with. It's highly recommended. Next up, we've got A Meatsmith Harvest by the Farmstead Meatsmith. And that is a podcast by Brandon and Lauren Sheard. They are the Farmstead Meatsmith. Well, Brandon is the Farmstead Meatsmith. We've been blessed to have Brandon out at our property at York Meadow Farm a few years ago when some friends of ours were hosting him at a beef butchering workshop, and they needed a place to host, and we were in a position to do so right after the property was built, and that was the first event that we had there. Next on the list is Cutting Corporate Ties by Greg Tosi. That's a new podcast that I've been listening to recently, and it's a new venture for Greg Tosi, who is in the process of cutting corporate ties and going out on his own. So that is an inspirational and short podcast that he's doing. Next up, we've got Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, a classic if you are a history fan, highly recommended. Also got the Dangerous History podcast by CJ, or Professor CJ, down in Florida. That is also a good podcast if you are into history. Next up, we've got the Entree Leadership podcast, hosted by Daniel Tardy of the Ramsey Network. Great stuff if you are a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or if you have any desire to be. All of the content from the Entree Leadership podcast is good stuff, highly recommended. Next up, Hotep's Been Told You by Hotep Jesus and Uncle Hotep. This, my friends, is a great podcast for news, current events, and a different perspective on politics and how you want to live your life. I would encourage you to check out hotepnation.com, of which I am a member. Check out the 10 Hotep Commandments. If you listen to this podcast and some and much of what I say resonates with you, you may be Hotep. Hotep and build. Moving on. Jordan B. Peterson podcast. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. That is a new podcast effort for him. I believe it is also available in YouTube video form. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson is a great thinker, albeit controversial. Definitely worth putting some time into if you want to get your brain muscle exercised. Next up, The Ken Coleman Show by Ken Coleman, also of the Ramsey Network. Good stuff. I listen to that as frequently as possible. We've also got The Keto Naturopath by Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you are interested in the keto diet, that is a podcast worth recommending. I don't listen to it as frequently as I used to, but it is definitely good content and worth following. Dr. Carl Goldkamp, easy for me to say. Next up, The Ramsey Show by the Ramsey Network. Generally speaking, good stuff when I feel like I need a boost to my financial way of thinking. Next up, Sapiens, a podcast for everything human by sapiens.org. That is a good podcast that I don't listen to as frequently as I used to. Definitely one for the thinking person. Highly recommended. We've got the Side Hustle Show with Nick Loper of Side Hustle Nation next on the list. Great show for those who are into side hustles and thinking about alternative streams of income and how to develop more of them. Next on the list, we've got the Survival Podcast by Jack Spirko. This is the podcast that I have likely been listening to the longest and the most outside of the Dave Ramsey Show, which was the first podcast I ever started listening to. Jack Spirko is a big influence and mentor, and just someone whose content I've been listening to for years. Definitely recommended. Some may think he's controversial. Some may not enjoy his content. It's admittedly not for everyone, but if you can't put your personal bias aside and listen to someone like him, there may be some challenges that are worth taking into consideration that you may be facing. So take a look at yourself in the mirror when you find someone who's highly intelligent, yet presents a view that's not necessarily 100% in line with yours. Because more often than not, there is something more for you to gain than you have to lose if you can't put your own personal bias aside. Finally, we've got the Tim Ferriss Show with Tim Ferriss to round out my list of podcasts. That was more like 15. And the next list I'm going to have to go through quite quickly because I'm on the last leg of my commute. These are the podcasts suggested by Dan Miller in an episode that I've linked to in the show notes. And it was an episode where he answered the question, what podcasts should I listen to in order to maximize my workout time? And he listed off his top 15, and I am going to share them with you here now, also listed in the show notes for reference. First off on the list, A Bit of Optimism by Simon Sinek. Second, Akimbo by Seth Godin. Next up, Entrepreneurs on Fire by John Lee Dumas. Next up, Eventual Millionaire by Jamie Masters. Next on the list, How I Built This by Guy Raz. Next up on the list, A Lead to Win by Michael Hyatt. Next on the list, Motive by Kevin Miller. Next on the list, The Ziglar Show, also by Kevin Miller. Next on the list, we've got Multiplier Mindset by Dan Sullivan. Next on the list, we've got On Being by Krista Tippett. Next on the list, we've got Super Soul Conversations by Oprah Winfrey. Next up, Read to Lead by Jeff Brown. Next up, The Brendan Show by Brendan Burchard. Next up, also The Entree Leadership, hosted by Daniel Tardy from the Ramsey Network, which I previously listed myself. And finally, to close out Dan Miller's list of the top podcasts that he provided to answer the question, how could you maximize your workout time, or whatever time you spend listening to podcasts, is a podcast called The Total Life Freedom Podcast by Vincent Pugliese. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right, but nevertheless, it's called The Total Life Freedom Podcast, and the title alone is enough to get me thinking about revisiting my podcast list. So, real quick, what I did with these 15 podcasts, only one of which I had previously listened to, was I downloaded a new podcast player and subscribed to these 15 podcasts on that player so that I can reference easily the list of podcasts that are being listened to by Dan Miller, who has created a wealth of content that is highly respected and very helpful for me. So hopefully that little tidbit on how I'm going to consume this particular list of podcasts is helpful for you. Hopefully the lists in general of both podcasts, or the podcast that I listen to and the podcast that Dan listens to, was of value to you. Now, there are other podcasts that I listen to as well, just not listed here. And I'm curious. I'm curious about what podcasts you listen to. So I would encourage you to join the conversation on the podcast group in Telegram. It's there at t.me/allaroundgrowth, where all of the content is dropped first and the best conversations take place because we are developing a little community there, and it is pretty cool. Small, vibrant, awesome. You should check it out. So hopefully this show was of value to you, and if it was, like I said, there's all the stuff in the show notes. There's links in the show notes to rate and review the podcast. If you like what you hear, please do that. If you don't follow the link in the show notes, just go to your podcast player of choice, give the show a rating, and share it with a friend or family member, share it on social media, whatever. Just throw it out there if you like what you hear. If you have any questions or feedback on the show or anything you want to run by me, anything you'd like to see me cover or hear me cover, rather, send it my way, allaroundgrowth@gmail.com. Or, like I said, the best way is to join that Telegram group, t.me/allaroundgrowth. Join up with us there and be a part of the community and be a part of the show. So, that's it, guys. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you tuning in. And I don't know. That's about it. I appreciate you. And I just wanted to say thank you. Because I mean it. So thanks, guys. Have a great day. This is Rob Kaiser, and thank you.